When my son told me I had 24 hours to pack my things and get out, I thought surely this was grief talking. After all, we just buried his father 3 days earlier, and emotions were running high. But as I watched him systematically change the locks on the house I'd called home for 37 years, I realized this wasn't grief. This was calculation. If you're watching this, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, because this story is about to take you on a ride you won't believe. My name is Alina, and 6 months ago, I thought I knew exactly who my family was. I was wrong about everything. Let me tell you how a 72-year-old grandmother went from homeless and heartbroken to holding cards so powerful that my own son begged me not to play them. Because, honey, sometimes the person everyone underestimates turns out to be the one running the whole game. 3 weeks ago, I was Alina Mitchell, devoted wife of 37 years, and mother to what I believed was a loving son. When Harold passed away suddenly from a stroke at 75, I thought my world had ended. The funeral was everything Harold would have wanted, dignified and simple, with family and friends sharing stories about his kindness and generosity. Even during those difficult days, I started noticing things that didn't sit right. My son Derek kept having hushed phone conversations that stopped the moment I entered a room. He'd disappear for hours at a time, claiming he was handling funeral arrangements, but when I asked about specifics, his answers were always vague. Derek had always been Harold's pride and joy. Our golden child who graduated from law school, married his college sweetheart Sarah, and gave us 2 beautiful grandchildren. When Derek started his own practice 5 years ago, Harold was so proud he couldn't stop bragging to anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, I was just the grandmother who babysat when needed and cooked Sunday dinners that brought everyone together. The first real warning sign came during the reading of Harold's will. I expected it to be a formality, something we'd get through together as a family. Instead, Derek insisted I didn't need to attend. He said the legal language would just confuse me, and that he'd explain everything afterward in terms I could understand. Like I was a child who couldn't handle grown-up conversations. I should have insisted on being there, but grief makes you compliant in ways you never expect. I trusted Derek completely. He was my son, Harold's son, a lawyer who surely had our family's best interests at heart. I stayed home that day, making sandwiches for the reception afterward, while Derek handled what he called the boring paperwork. That evening, Derek came home with news that left me speechless. According to him, Harold had left everything to Derek. The house, the business, the investments, all of it. I would receive a small monthly allowance and could continue living in the house as long as Derek approved. It was, he explained, Harold's way of ensuring I'd always be taken care of without the burden of managing complex financial matters. The numbers didn't make sense to me, but Derek assured me that Harold's business had been struggling more than I knew. There wasn't as much money as I'd thought. The $40 million figure he mentioned seemed impossible, but Derek explained it was mostly tied up in investments and business assets that required careful management. I accepted his explanation because what choice did I have? Derek was the lawyer. Derek was the son Harold had groomed to take over everything. Derek was the one who understood money and business in ways I never had. For 2 weeks, I lived quietly in what Derek now called his house, trying to adjust to my new reality as a dependent rather than a partner. The change in Derek's behavior was subtle at first. He'd make comments about how expensive it was to maintain such a large house. He'd suggest that maybe I'd be happier in a smaller place, somewhere more suitable for a woman my age. Sarah would nod along sympathetically, talking about how wonderful senior communities were these days, how I'd have people my own age to socialize with, activities to keep me busy. What they meant was clear. I was in the way of their plans for their inheritance. The breaking point came last Monday morning. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when Derek and Sarah arrived with their children and several large boxes. They announced they were moving in immediately. The children needed more space, Derek explained, and it made financial sense for them to live in the family home while I downsized to something more appropriate. I stared at them, not quite processing what was happening. "This is my home," I said quietly. "I've lived here for 37 years. I raised you in this house." Derek's expression hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "Actually, Mom, this is my house now. Dad left it to me, remember? I've been generous letting you stay here rent-free, but it's time for you to find your own place." The coldness in his voice was like a physical slap. This wasn't the boy I'd rocked to sleep, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose homework I'd helped with every night for 12 years. This was a stranger wearing my son's face. Sarah jumped in with fake enthusiasm. We found a lovely senior apartment complex about 20 minutes away. It's very affordable and they have a shuttle service for errands. You'd love the independence. Affordable. My son had just inherited $40 million and was suggesting I move to subsidized housing. Derek handed me a piece of paper. Here's the address. They have an opening this week, so you'll need to be out by Friday. That gives you 4 days to pack your things. I looked at the paper in my hands, trying to make sense of what was happening. 4 days to leave the home where I'd spent more than half my life. 4 days to pack up 37 years of memories into whatever would fit in a senior apartment. But Derek, surely we can work something out. Maybe I could stay in the guest room, or we could convert the basement. His laugh was harsh and unfamiliar. Mom, you need to understand something. This house is worth $3 million. The property taxes alone are more than your monthly allowance. I can't subsidize your lifestyle anymore. Subsidize my lifestyle, like I was some kind of burden he'd been carrying instead of his mother who'd sacrificed everything to raise him. That's when he delivered the words that changed everything between us forever. Look, I know this is hard, but Dad's gone now. You're on your own. It's time you learn to take care of yourself instead of depending on everyone else. The cruelty of those words took my breath away. Depending on everyone else. As if the woman who'd worked 2 jobs to help pay for his law school, who'd postponed her own dreams to support Harold's business, who'd spent decades putting everyone else's needs before her own, was somehow a burden. I packed my belongings that week in a daze. 37 years of marriage, 35 years of motherhood, reduced to whatever would fit in my small car. Derek watched from the window as I loaded boxes, checking his watch like I was making him late for something important. The senior complex Derek had found was exactly what you'd expect for $400 a month. Thin walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and the persistent smell of industrial cleaning products trying to mask something unpleasant. My new home was a studio apartment with a kitchenette, a fold-out bed, and a view of the dumpsters. As I unpacked my few remaining possessions in that depressing little room, something Derek had said kept nagging at me. He'd mentioned that Harold's business was struggling, that there wasn't as much money as I'd thought. But that didn't align with the man I'd been married to for 37 years. Harold had been meticulous about finances. Every month, he'd show me bank statements and investment summaries. He'd explained his business dealings in detail, making sure I understood where our security came from. The man who'd planned every aspect of our financial future wouldn't have left me destitute. That night, I called Harold's business partner, Robert Chen, someone who'd been like family to us for over a decade. Robert had been notably absent from the funeral, which had struck me as odd at the time. Eleanor, Robert's voice was filled with surprise when he heard from me. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Derek said you were too grief-stricken to take calls, but I have some questions about the business transition. What kind of questions? I asked, suddenly alert. Well, Harold and I had agreements about what would happen to his shares if something happened to him. But Derek is claiming ownership of everything, including assets that should be jointly held. I've been asking to see the will, but Derek keeps saying his lawyers are handling it. My heart started racing. Derek told me that Harold left everything to him, that the business was struggling and there wasn't much money. Robert was quiet for a long moment. Eleanor, I don't know what Derek told you, but Harold's business was thriving. We just closed a deal last month that netted us $8 million. Harold's shares alone are worth at least $25 million, and that's not counting his other investments. The room started spinning. $25 million just from the business. Plus other investments, plus the house, plus everything else Harold had built over decades of careful planning. Robert, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Was there ever a formal reading of Harold's will? Not that I was invited to. Derek contacted me a few days after the funeral and said he was now Harold's successor. When I asked about the legal documentation, he said everything was being handled by his law firm. I hung up the phone with shaking hands. Derek had lied about everything. The struggling business, the limited inheritance, even the will reading itself. But why would my own son deceive me so completely? And more importantly, what had really been in Harold's will? The next morning, I did something I should have done weeks earlier. I looked up Harold's lawyer, James Morrison, the man who'd handled our legal affairs for 15 years. His secretary was surprised to hear from me. Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Morrison has been trying to reach you since the funeral. He said it was urgent that you contact him about your husband's estate. My hands were trembling as she transferred me to James Morrison's office. Within seconds, his familiar voice was on the line, filled with concern and confusion. "Alina, thank God you called. I've been worried sick. Derek told me you were too distraught to handle estate matters and that he was managing everything on your behalf. But there are some serious discrepancies I need to discuss with you." "What kind of discrepancies?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I knew. "Alina, I need you to come to my office immediately. What Derek has told you about Harold's will bears no resemblance to the actual document. In fact, what he's done may constitute several serious crimes." As I sat in that cramped studio apartment, staring at the phone in my hand, I realized that my son hadn't just betrayed me. He'd systematically destroyed my life based on lies so elaborate they'd taken weeks to uncover. But Derek had made one crucial mistake in his careful planning. He'd underestimated his mother. Tomorrow, I would drive to James Morrison's office and learn the truth about Harold's will. Tomorrow, I would discover just how much my son had stolen from me. And tomorrow, Derek would begin to learn that the helpless old woman he'd discarded was about to become his worst nightmare. Because sometimes, when you think you've won everything, you discover you've actually lost the only game that really mattered. James Morrison's office was exactly as I remembered it from all those years of estate planning meetings with Harold. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs that had seen decades of family crises, and the reassuring smell of old books and coffee. But this time, I wasn't there as half of a couple planning for the future. I was there as a woman who just discovered her entire life had been built on her son's lies. James looked older than I remembered, his silver hair thinner, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. He stood when I entered, his expression a mixture of relief and barely contained anger. "Alina, I'm so glad you finally got my messages. Please, sit down. We have a great deal to discuss, and I'm afraid none of it is going to be easy to hear." I settled into the familiar leather chair, my purse clutched tightly in my lap. Derek told me that Harold left everything to him, that I would receive a small monthly allowance and could live in the house at Derek's discretion. He said the business was struggling and there wasn't much money. James Morrison's face darkened in a way I'd never seen before. "Alina, I've been practicing law for 42 years, and I've never encountered fraud this systematic and cruel. Your son has lied to you about everything." He opened a thick folder and pulled out a document I recognized. Harold's signature was at the bottom, witnessed and notarized, but as James began reading, I realized Derek had fabricated every single detail he'd told me. "I, Harold James Mitchell, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath to my beloved wife Alina Marie Mitchell the following. Our primary residence at 247 Maple Grove Drive, including all furnishings, personal effects, and grounds. Additionally, I leave her 65% of all financial assets, business interests, and investments, totaling approximately $26 million. The room tilted sideways, $26 million. The house, 65% of everything Harold had built." James continued reading, his voice growing more serious with each word. "To my son Derek Michael Mitchell, I leave $15 million, to be distributed in a managed trust with quarterly payments beginning 6 months after my death, contingent upon his respectful treatment of his mother and compliance with family values I have instilled. Contingent upon his respectful treatment of me." Harold had known. Somehow, he'd anticipated exactly what Derek might try to do. "James," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Derek told me he inherited everything. He moved me out of my house. He put me in a studio apartment and told me I was lucky to get $400 a month." The elderly lawyer's hands were shaking with rage. "Alina, what Derek has done is called elder abuse, fraud, and theft. He's committed multiple felonies, but there's more you need to know. More. I wasn't sure I could handle any more revelations. The trust provision for Derek specifically states that if he fails to treat you with dignity and respect following Harold's death, if he attempts to coerce you or manipulate your living situation, the entire $15 million reverts to you instead." I stared at him in complete shock. "Are you saying that by kicking me out of my house and lying about the will, Derek just forfeited his entire inheritance?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. Derek's inheritance now belongs to you as well. You're not inheriting $26 million, Alina. You're inheriting $41 million, plus the house, plus Harold's business shares." The irony was so perfect it was almost funny. Derek had been so desperate to claim his inheritance that he'd triggered the exact mechanism Harold had designed to protect me from his greed. "James, how is this possible? Why didn't you stop this weeks ago?" I tried, Alina. I called your house dozens of times, but Derek said you were too distraught to discuss business matters. He claimed he had power of attorney and was handling everything on your behalf. I demanded to see the documentation, but he kept stalling, saying his law firm was preparing the paperwork. Of course, Derek had isolated me from Harold's lawyer. Every lie required 10 more lies to support it. What do I do now? I asked, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. James smiled, and for the first time since Harold's funeral, I saw genuine warmth directed at me. Now, my dear, we call Derek and inform him that his little game is over. We also contact the police about the fraud, and we begin the process of getting you back everything he stole. Can Derek fight this? With what money? Every account he thought he controlled actually belongs to you. Every business decision he's made over the past month is null and void. He's about to discover that the house he's living in, the cars he's driving, even the credit cards he's been using, all belong to his mother. I thought about Derek in my house, probably already planning renovations with money he thought was his. Sarah was likely shopping for new furniture, calculating how this windfall would change their lifestyle. They had no idea that in a few hours, their entire world was going to collapse. James picked up his phone. Eleanor, would you like me to call Derek, or would you prefer to deliver the news yourself? The question hung in the air as I considered my options. Helpless victim
For weeks,
of Derek's
I'd been
manipulation. The grieving widow who couldn't understand complex financial matters. The burden he'd graciously housed until he could dispose of me properly. I'd like to call him myself, I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. James handed me his desk phone and I dialed the number to my own house. Derek answered on the second ring, his voice distracted. Mom, is everything okay? You sound different. Hello, Derek. I'm calling from James Morrison's office. You remember him, don't you? Daddy's lawyer for the past 15 years. There was a pause, and I could almost hear Derek's mind racing. Mom, I told you I was handling all the legal stuff. You don't need to bother Mr. Morrison with questions. Actually, Derek, Mr. Morrison has been trying to reach me for weeks. Apparently, there are some discrepancies between what you told me about Daddy's will and what the actual document says. The silence stretched on for so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Derek's voice came back, careful and controlled. Mom, grief can make people confused. Sometimes lawyers try to take advantage of that confusion. Whatever Mr. Morrison told you, I can explain. Even caught red-handed, Derek was still trying to manipulate me, still treating me like I was too stupid to understand my own inheritance. Derek, let me clarify something for you. Not only did you never inherit anything, but your actual inheritance, the 15 million Daddy left you, now belongs to me as well, thanks to a clause about treating your mother with dignity and respect. The phone went completely silent. I could picture Derek's face, the color draining as he realized his carefully constructed lies were crumbling. That's impossible, he finally whispered. James Morrison is sitting right here if you'd like to discuss the impossibility of fraud charges with him. Oh, and Derek, you have 24 hours to move out of my house. Mom, please, you don't understand the complexity of the situation. There are tax implications, business considerations. I understand perfectly. I understand that you forged documents, lied about will readings, and threw your 72-year-old mother out of her own home because you thought I was too senile to notice. His voice turned desperate. Mom, think about Sarah and the children. Think about what this will do to our family. I thought about them when I was packing 37 years of memories into boxes. I thought about them when you called me a burden who needed to learn independence. I thought about them when you put me in a studio apartment next to the dumpsters. Mom, we can work this out. Let's meet somewhere and discuss this rationally. We can meet at the courthouse when you're arraigned for elder abuse and fraud. The line went quiet again, then Derek's voice came back, smaller and more frightened than I'd ever heard it. You wouldn't press charges against your own son. Something cold and final crystallized in my chest. Watch me. I hung up and looked at James, who was beaming with approval. How long before he's arrested? I've already contacted Detective Williams. She specializes in elder fraud cases. They'll execute search warrants this evening for Derek's home and office. My home, I corrected. James smiled wider. Your home, Eleanor. Detective Williams will also be seizing Derek's bank accounts, credit cards, and any assets he's acquired using your inheritance. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Mom, please reconsider. Think about the grandchildren. I showed the message to James, who shook his head grimly. Emotional manipulation, classic behavior for this type of crime. I typed back, I am thinking about them. They deserve to learn what happens when you steal from family. Within an hour, Sarah called. Her voice was shaking with barely controlled panic. Eleanor, surely we can resolve this privately. Derek made some poor decisions, but involving the police seems excessive. Sarah, did you know the wool was forged? That's not the point, Alina. You have to understand the pressure Derek was under. He was trying to protect you from making poor financial decisions. So that's a yes. It wasn't malicious, Alina. Derek genuinely believed he was helping by managing your inheritance. By lying to me and throwing me out of my house. Alina, please be reasonable. We have children to think about. I was reasonable for 35 years of motherhood. It didn't prevent Derek from committing multiple felonies against me. Sarah was crying now. What happens to us? What happens to the kids? That should have been Derek's concern before he decided to steal $41 million from his mother. After I hung up, James began explaining the legal process that would unfold over the coming weeks. Asset recovery, criminal proceedings, the complex unwinding of Derek's fraudulent activities. But all I could think about was driving back to that depressing studio apartment one last time to collect my few belongings. Tomorrow, I would be sleeping in my own house again. In the master bedroom Harold and I had shared for 37 years, surrounded by the memories Derek had tried to steal along with everything else. James handed me a set of keys. These are to the house, Alina. I had the locks changed this afternoon as a security precaution. Derek would come home to discover he was locked out of the house he'd claimed as his own. The poetic justice was almost too perfect. As I drove back to collect my belongings, I passed Derek's law office. Through the window, I could see him frantically shredding documents while Sarah paced behind him. Too little, too late. Detective Williams had already secured court orders to seize his files. My phone rang as I pulled into the parking lot of the senior complex. Unknown number. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Rebecca Torres from Channel 9 News. We understand you're the victim of a significant elder fraud case involving your son. Would you be willing to share your story? Word was spreading fast. In a town this size, the arrest of a prominent attorney for defrauding his elderly mother was major news. Miss Torres, I appreciate your interest, but I'm not ready for interviews yet. I understand this must be difficult, but your story could help other seniors recognize warning signs of family financial abuse. How many other elderly parents were being manipulated by adult children who saw them as obstacles to inheritance? If I decided to tell my story, would I have control over how it's presented? Absolutely. We could arrange a sit-down interview where you'd have final approval over the content. I thought about Derek, probably sitting in a jail cell right now, still believing this was all some misunderstanding he could lawyer his way out of. Let me get back to you, Miss Torres. I might have quite a story to tell. After hanging up, I sat in my car outside that horrible apartment building, looking up at the tiny window that had been my view for the past 3 weeks. Tomorrow, I'd be looking out over the garden Harold and I had planted together, from the bedroom where we'd dreamed about growing old together. Derek had stolen those dreams along with everything else, but he'd made one crucial miscalculation. He'd assumed that because I'd spent decades putting others first, I'd forgotten how to put myself first when it mattered most. He was about to learn just how wrong he'd been. As I climbed the stairs to collect my belongings one final time, I couldn't help but smile. Derek had always been so proud of his legal education, so confident in his ability to outsmart everyone around him. But apparently, they don't teach you in law school that the biggest mistake you can make is underestimating your own mother. The police arrested Derek at 6:30 p.m. while he was having dinner at Romano's, apparently celebrating what he still believed was his successful inheritance scheme with Sarah and another couple. According to Detective Williams, he screamed about false arrest and demanded to call his lawyer, who turned out to be his golf buddy with no experience in criminal defense. Sarah was arrested at their temporary hotel room an hour later. The forensic accountant had traced the forged documents to a printing company Sarah's marketing firm used for creating fake testimonials. Apparently, my daughter-in-law had quite the creative resume when it came to document fabrication. I spent my first night back in my house in 3 weeks, sleeping in the master bedroom Harold, and I had shared for 37 years. Derek had already moved his belongings into our space, replacing Harold's careful organization with his chaos of expensive suits and electronic gadgets. I packed everything into garbage bags and left them on the front porch. He could collect them when he made bail. The house felt different now, not because Harold was gone, but because I was finally seeing it as truly mine. For decades, I'd maintained it as Harold's sanctuary, designed around his preferences, his business needs, his vision of how we should live. Now, looking around with clear eyes, I realized how little of me had ever been reflected in these rooms. That was about to change dramatically. James called around noon with updates on the legal proceedings. Derek's bail is set at $100,000. Since all his accounts are frozen, he'll have to find someone else to cover it. What about Sarah? I asked, still processing that my daughter-in-law had been actively involved in the forgery scheme. 200,000. Apparently, the judge wasn't impressed with her history of fraudulent marketing practices. Who knew your daughter-in-law had been under investigation for creating fake customer reviews? I certainly hadn't known, but then again, I'd been excluded from most family discussions about their business dealings. Derek and Sarah had always spoken to me like I was a child when money came up, simplifying concepts they assumed I couldn't grasp. They were about grandmother had actually understood all along. James, to learn exactly how much this, I want to make some changes to the house. Derek had contractors lined up to renovate before his arrest. I'd like to proceed with some of those plans, but with my own vision instead. Excellent idea, Eleanor. It's your home now. Do whatever makes you happy. What made me happy, I realized, was the idea of undoing every assumption Derek had made about my inheritance. He'd planned to gut the kitchen, replace all the hardwood floors, and convert Harold's study into a game room for his children. I was going to turn the study into a library and convert the planned game room into an art studio where I could finally pursue the painting I'd abandoned when I became a wife and mother. My phone rang with an unknown number. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Patricia Wells from the Senior Advocacy Network. We understand you're the victim of elder fraud by a family member. Would you be willing to speak at our upcoming conference about warning signs other seniors should watch for? Word was spreading beyond just local news. The story of a prominent attorney stealing from his elderly mother was resonating with advocacy groups across the state. Mrs. Wells, I appreciate the invitation, but I'm still processing everything that's happened. Of course, but your story could prevent this from happening to other grandmothers. Family financial abuse is more common than people realize, and victims often don't know where to turn for help. She had a point that struck close to my heart. How many other women my age were being manipulated by adult children who saw them as inconvenient obstacles to their inheritance plans? If I agreed to speak, would I have input on the message we're sharing? Absolutely. This would be your platform to help others recognize the warning signs you missed initially. Let me think about it, Mrs. Wells. I may have quite a story to tell. After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of the expensive wine Derek had given Harold for Christmas, wine I was apparently now drinking in my own house, purchased with my own money, while contemplating whether to become a public advocate for elder rights. Life had certainly taken an unexpected turn for the 72-year-old grandmother. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 a.m. the next morning. Through the window, I could see Derek on my front porch wearing yesterday's clothes and looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. He'd made bail somehow, though I couldn't imagine who had the money to help him. I opened the door but didn't invite him inside. Good morning, Derek. Mom, please. We need to talk. This has all gotten completely out of hand. Has it? Because from where I'm standing, justice is finally being served. Derek's eyes were bloodshot, his usual perfect appearance completely shattered. I made terrible mistakes. Horrible mistakes. But I'm still your son. Are you? Because sons don't typically forge legal documents to steal their mother's inheritance and then throw her out of her own home. I wasn't stealing, I was trying to protect you from making poor financial decisions. You've never managed large amounts of money before. Even now, even after being arrested for multiple felonies, Derek couldn't admit the truth. In his mind, he was still the victim of my unreasonable expectations and legal technicalities. Derek, let me share something your father told me 6 months before he died. He said he was worried about your sense of entitlement, your attitude toward money, and how you treated people you considered beneath you. Derek's face went completely pale. Dad never said that. He said you reminded him of his brother Thomas. Charming, intelligent, and completely incapable of thinking about anyone but yourself. He told me he was changing the will specifically because he was afraid of what you'd do to me if you had complete control. That's impossible. I pulled out my phone and showed him a video file. Actually, it's not. Your father recorded a message explaining his decision, to be played if you ever contested the will or treated me poorly after his death. Derek stared at the phone like it contained a bomb. He knew, sweetheart. He knew exactly who you were underneath all that charm and legal education. The only thing he didn't predict was how far you'd actually go to get what you wanted. Play it, Derek whispered, his voice barely audible. I touched the screen and Harold's voice filled the morning air, clear and measured, and absolutely devastating to Derek's remaining composure. If you're hearing this, Derek, it means my fears about your character were justified. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped my son had more integrity than I suspected, but if a leaner is playing this recording, it means you've proven me right in the worst possible way. Derek sank onto the porch steps, as Harold's voice continued with surgical precision. I spent 37 years watching your mother sacrifice her dreams, her ambitions, her independence to take care of our family. She worked part-time jobs to help pay for your law school while I built my practice. She postponed her education, gave up career opportunities, and poured herself into being the wife and mother she thought we needed. The recording continued for several more minutes, each word carefully chosen to cut through Derek's justifications and self-deceptions. By the time you hear this, you'll have discovered that treating your mother poorly has cost you everything. I hope it was worth it, son. When it ended, Derek was crying like I hadn't seen since he was a small boy. Not the manipulative tears he'd learned to use on judges and juries, but ugly, broken sobs that came from somewhere deep inside. He hated me, Derek whispered through his tears. No, Derek, he loved you enough to hope you'd prove him wrong. You chose to prove him right instead. Derek looked up at me, mascara from Sarah's makeup still streaking down his cheeks from their arrest the night before. What happens now, Mom? Now you face the consequences of your choices. The fraud charges, the investigation, the public humiliation when this story hits the national news. Derek's face crumpled completely. Mom, please think about what this will do to Sarah's career, to our children, to our entire family's reputation. I am thinking about it, Derek. I'm thinking about how you didn't consider any of those things when you decided to commit multiple felonies against your own mother. He stood up slowly, looking older and more defeated than I'd ever seen my successful attorney son. I know you won't believe this, but I never meant for it to go this far. I just wanted the security, the status. I wanted to never have to worry about money again, and I thought you'd never know the difference. For the first time since this nightmare began, Derek was telling me the complete truth instead of trying to manipulate the situation. I believe you, Derek. But wanting something doesn't justify destroying people to get it, especially when those people are your own family. He nodded, tears still flowing freely down his face. What can I do to fix this? You can start by admitting what you did was wrong. Not misguided, not protective, not legally complex. Wrong. It was wrong, he said quietly. It was completely, unforgivably wrong, and I knew it was wrong even while I was doing it. And then you can face whatever consequences come next with some dignity instead of trying to lawyer your way out of them. Derek looked at me for a long moment, seeing perhaps for the first time not the pushover mother he'd always known, but the woman who just outmaneuvered him completely using his own father's wisdom and planning. Walked away from my porch. I deserved this. Shoulders slumped in defeat. Mom? I realized Derek, that for the first time in decades, I felt truly powerful. Not because I'd destroyed my son, but because I'd finally stood up for myself when it mattered most. The 72-year-old grandmother Derek had tried to discard was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who'd learned that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. And Derek was about to spend the next several months learning just how dangerous his mother could be when she finally decided to stop being nice. 3 days after Derek's porch confession, Sarah's mother showed up at my door. Patricia Hayes was everything I'd expected from Derek's mother-in-law. Perfectly coiffed silver hair, dripping with jewelry that probably cost more than most people's cars, and radiating the kind of entitlement that only comes from 3 generations of inherited wealth. Patricia, we need to discuss this situation like rational adults. I invited her in, curious to see what version of reality the Hayes family had constructed to explain their daughter's felony charges. Patricia settled herself in my living room like she was granting me an audience with royalty. Sarah made some poor choices, obviously, but prosecuting her seems rather vindictive for a grandmother, don't you think? Vindictive. Your daughter helped forge legal documents and participated in stealing my inheritance. Sarah was following Derek's lead. She didn't understand the full situation. The woman was actually trying to blame my son for her daughter's criminal behavior. I had to admire the audacity. Mrs. Hayes, Sarah created fraudulent marketing materials for years before she met Derek. This wasn't following anyone's lead. This was a pattern of criminal behavior. Patricia's smile faltered slightly, but she pressed on. Sarah's family is prepared to compensate you for your inconvenience. Let's say $3 million in exchange for dropping the charges against Sarah. $3 million to forgive the woman who'd helped steal $41 million from me. The math alone was insulting. Mrs. Hayes, your daughter participated in a scheme that cost me everything I owned. You think $3 million covers that? Alina, be realistic. Sarah has children, a career, a reputation to maintain. Sending her to prison serves no one. It serves justice, Patricia. Patricia's polished facade cracked completely. Justice, you're destroying multiple families over money you never would have known how to manage anyway. There it was, the same condescending attitude that had poisoned Derek's thinking. In their world, I was just the help who'd got uppity. Mrs. Hayes, I think we're done here. Patricia stood, her composure restored like nothing had happened. Very well, Alina. But you should know that Sarah's legal team has found some interesting information about Harold's business practices. It would be unfortunate if that became public during the trial. The threat was clear, but I felt no fear, only curiosity. What kind of information? The kind that might make you reconsider who the real criminal in this situation was, Alina. After she left, I called James immediately. Alina, whatever they think they found, it doesn't change the facts of Derek and Sarah's crimes. But could it affect the case, James? Potentially, if they can muddy the waters enough, create doubt about Harold's character or business practices, it might influence a jury's sympathy. I thought about Harold, about our marriage, about all the secrets that might be buried in 37 years of shared life. James, I want to know everything about Harold's business dealings. Every contract, every partnership, every potential irregularity. Alina, are you sure? Sometimes the past is better left undisturbed. The Hayes family is threatening to drag Harold's memory through the mud to protect their criminal daughter. I'd rather know the truth first. That evening, I sat in Harold's study and began going through his files systematically. Harold had been obsessively organized, every document dated and filed precisely. But as I dug deeper into his business records, I began finding things that made my stomach turn. Payments to shell companies that seemed to exist only on paper. Consulting fees that appeared excessive for the services described. Partnerships with firms that had no legitimate business address. By midnight, I discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about my husband of 37 years. The private investigator James recommended was a sharp-eyed woman named Linda Torres, who specialized in financial crimes. She spent 8 hours in Harold's study, photographing documents and building what she called the complete picture of my husband's business empire. Mrs. Mitchell, your husband was running a sophisticated tax evasion scheme through his consulting firm. We're talking about millions of dollars in unreported income over the past 15 years. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. That's impossible. Harold was the most honest man I knew. I'm sorry, Alina, but the evidence is overwhelming. He was hiding income from the IRS using a network of fake consulting contracts and shell companies. I stared at the documents spread across Harold's desk. Invoices for services that were never performed. Consulting agreements with companies that didn't actually exist. Payment schedules that corresponded with known tax deadlines. How long has this been going on? Based on these records, at least 15 years, probably longer. 15 years. While I was hosting charity fundraisers and volunteering at the church, my husband was systematically defrauding the federal government. Mrs. Mitchell, there's more. The $15 million Harold left Derek, a significant portion of that money came from unreported income. If the IRS discovers this, they'll seize everything as unpaid taxes and penalties. The room started spinning. Everything. The house, the investments, my entire inheritance. Unless what, Linda? Unless Derek and Sarah's legal team already knows about this and is planning to use it as leverage. If they tip off the IRS about Harold's tax evasion, they might be able to negotiate reduced sentences in exchange for cooperation. My daughter and her husband weren't just thieves. They were holding a nuclear weapon over my head, threatening to expose Harold's crimes to destroy me completely. But they'd made one critical miscalculation in their desperate attempt to avoid prison. They'd forgot that I'd spent 37 years as Harold's wife, watching him build his empire from nothing. They assumed I was the naive grandmother who never understood the complexities of business. What they didn't realize was that I'd always known exactly what Harold was doing. You see, when you've been married to someone for nearly 4 decades, you notice things. Late-night phone calls that stop when you enter the room. Business meetings that happen at odd hours. Cash payments that don't appear on any legitimate books. I wasn't the helpless widow Derek thought he was manipulating. I was the woman who'd helped Harold build and maintain his carefully constructed financial maze. The IRS investigation Patricia threatened never materialized because I'd already contacted them months before Harold's death. The tax evasion scheme Linda discovered wasn't news to me, it was my insurance policy. Harold and I had spent his final year working with federal investigators, providing documentation in exchange for immunity and legitimacy for our remaining assets. Derek received 18 months in federal prison. Sarah got 14 months. The Hayes family's threats evaporated when they discovered that everything they thought they knew about Harold's business was exactly what the government had allowed them to believe. Today, I'm not just a $41 million heiress. I'm the founder of the Alina Mitchell Foundation for Elder Protection, using my story and resources to help other grandparents recognize the warning signs of family financial abuse. Because sometimes the most dangerous people in your life are the ones who think they know you best. Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe if this story resonated with you. Share your own experiences in the comments below, because your voice matters too.